I didn't know why I froze when she walked into the bookstore that rainy Thursday afternoon. Maybe it was the way the light caught her hair, turning strands of brown into something that almost looked gold. Or maybe it was the sound of her voice when she said, almost teasingly, "Pretend I'm not her sister." I looked up from the counter where I was stacking new arrivals, and there she was, confident, effortless, like she owned not just the space, but the moment. She leaned on the edge of the table, scanning the shelves with a casual grace that made everything else, my half-finished coffee, the faint smell of mildew from the old books, fade out of focus. I should have spoken, said something witty, or at least nodded politely. Instead, I swallowed and tried to act like I wasn't staring, which, judging by her smirk, she had already noticed. Her sister, the younger one, had been my co-worker for a couple of months. I knew the rules. I knew I shouldn't feel anything unusual when she came around. But when this older woman, the one her sister had always talked about with that mix of exasperation and admiration, was standing there, smiling at me like she was letting me in on a private joke, I felt my chest tighten. "I didn't expect anyone to actually be here," she said, tilting her head slightly, as if testing me, measuring me. Her tone wasn't flirty, not exactly, but it wasn't neutral either. It carried a weight I couldn't place. I nodded, my hands fumbling with the stack of books in front of me. I cleared my throat and offered a weak, "Yeah, slow afternoon." She laughed, soft and knowing, and for a moment the room felt smaller. The rain tapping against the windows became a distant hum, and I realized I couldn't stop looking at the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the subtle tilt of her chin, the way she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear without breaking our gaze. There was a pause, the kind that stretches too long and makes your stomach feel like it's tipping over. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a quiet, "Right." She tilted her head again, watching me, and I thought I saw a flicker of amusement, or was it curiosity, in her eyes. Then, unexpectedly, she picked up a paperback, her fingers brushing mine as I handed it over. My skin tingled. She didn't apologize, didn't pull back. She just held the book for a moment, meeting my eyes, and smiled in that deliberate, layered way that made me wonder what she was thinking. I wanted to ask her, wanted to know if this smile was meant for me, or if I was just imagining it. She sighed lightly and set the book down. "Thanks," she said, and for some reason, I felt like she had given me more than just a polite word. Something unspoken lingered between the tilt of her head, the pause in her voice, the faint scent of vanilla, and something I couldn't name. By the time she left, rain dripping from her umbrella, I was still standing behind the counter, my hands empty, my mind full. Every time I tried to move on, the echo of her smile replayed, stubborn and persistent, like it had taken up residence in my chest. And I couldn't stop thinking about one thing: what it would mean if, even for a moment, I pretended she wasn't her sister at all. I hadn't expected her to show up again so soon. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shiny and wet, and I was rearranging a new shipment of novels when the bell above the bookstore door jingled. She stepped in, carrying the same calm, self-assured air, but there was something different today, a faint tightness in her shoulders, the kind that made her look smaller, more human. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though my hands were suddenly sticky with glue from the book displays. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need a recommendation," she said, lifting her brow just slightly. Her sister had told me she liked historical fiction, but her tone suggested she wasn't really there for the books. I walked her over to the section, noticing the way she leaned lightly against the shelf, fingers brushing the spines without focus. I couldn't help but glance at her hands. They were strong, graceful, the knuckles just slightly red, like she'd been working or writing a lot. I wondered if she always carried herself so deliberately, or if it was a shield. "Something with weight," she murmured, not meeting my eyes. The pause lingered, as if she were hesitating on something unsaid. I nodded, picking up a worn hardcover from the shelf. "This one's slow but layered. You'd probably like the character work." My voice sounded too loud in the quiet space. She took the book with a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was a silence, the kind that hovers like a held breath. I realized I wanted to fill it, but I didn't want to push too hard. She looked tired, just for a second, a shadow crossing her face before she composed herself. It made my chest tighten, The way I sometimes noticed my sister's face when she was stressed, except this time I felt like I shouldn't stare. "You always pick the right ones," she said finally, a faint smile breaking through her careful mask. Her voice carried the smallest tremor of exhaustion. She looked at the floor, then back at me, as if testing whether I'd notice. I did. I cleared my throat and said nothing, but my fingers brushed hers briefly as I handed her the book. It was a small, meaningless contact, except it wasn't. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse beneath, and something unspoken passed between us, fragile and dangerous in its quiet intensity. She held the book to her chest for a moment, eyes downcast, then glanced up and met my gaze. "Thanks," she whispered. Not the casual thanks from a stranger, not the playful tease from before, something softer, weighted, vulnerable. I wanted to ask if she was okay. I wanted to reach out and ease the tension that seemed to wrap around her like a second skin. But I didn't. I let the pause stretch, feeling it settle over us like a shared secret. And then she smiled, just a fraction, hesitant but deliberate. And the room seemed smaller again, warmer. It was a smile that made the rain-streaked streets outside irrelevant, the books around us mere background. I realized I couldn't stop thinking about it, about her, about how something so quiet could feel so loud. For a moment, I imagined if she leaned closer, if she let herself be seen just a little more, and then I blinked, and the moment passed, leaving me with the faint, impossible pull of what could never quite be spoken aloud. The shop had closed hours ago, but neither of us moved toward the door. Outside, the storm rattled the windows, a steady drum of rain and wind that made the quiet inside feel almost sacred. She had lingered after picking up her book, lingering like she wasn't sure how to leave, and I hadn't asked her to. I was shelving a stack of returned novels when she came up behind me, her presence soft, almost imperceptible. She leaned slightly over my shoulder, her hair brushing my arm as she peered at the titles. My pulse jumped, but I kept my hands steady, turning a book slowly to hide my shaking fingers. "You always organize them by what?" she asked, voice low. Curious, but not just about books. There was something more in her tone, something that made me aware of every inch of space between us. I swallowed, trying to sound casual. "Author, then title. I guess it makes sense to me." My throat felt tight. You like it?" She smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement and something unreadable behind it. She looked tired, and I wanted to brush the stray strand of hair from her face, but I held back, aware of the heat creeping up my neck. The storm outside matched the tension in the room, making the air between us feel charged, almost dangerous. We stood like that for a long moment, closer than necessary, but neither speaking, neither moving. I noticed the subtle curve of her fingers as she rested her hand on the edge of the shelf, the way her shoulders slumped slightly in exhaustion. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but the words wouldn't come. A sudden buzz from her phone cut through the quiet. She glanced down, and I saw her jaw tighten. It was a message from someone I didn't know, an ex, maybe, or a friend who demanded attention at the wrong time. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, and I realized how delicate the moment was. One wrong move, one interruption, and everything between us could shatter or be misunderstood. I stepped slightly back, giving her space, though my chest still ached at the distance. "I can wait," I murmured, though for what, I didn't know. She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and I saw her eyes flick toward mine, conflicted. She laughed softly, nervous, brushing a hand against her mouth as if embarrassed by her own hesitation. The gesture made something twist in my chest. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap between us, but the invisible line of restraint held me back. The storm raged on, and for a heartbeat, it felt like we were suspended, the outside world gone. I could almost lean in, almost bridge the space between us, almost let the pull we both felt take over. But a flash of lightning illuminated the room, harsh and sudden, and reality intruded. Her phone buzzed again, demanding attention, pulling her back. She stepped away, reluctantly, her smile fading just slightly as she adjusted the strap of her bag. I watched her go, the ache of almost touching her lingering in my chest. My hands trembled, though I couldn't tell if it was the storm, the cold, or the weight of what we hadn't done. And still, the thought wouldn't leave me. If not now, then when? We ended up in the small back office, the storm still drumming on the roof above. I had been stacking inventory, and she had been leaning against the counter, silent, almost unreadable. For a long while, we didn't speak, just listened to the rain, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then she sighed, a sound so soft it almost disappeared into the room. I realized she had been holding it in, the weight of something she didn't know how to say. "What are we doing?" she asked finally, her voice trembling just enough to betray the control she usually held so effortlessly. She didn't look at me directly, eyes fixed on a stack of papers. I froze. The words shouldn't have sounded so simple, so ordinary, and yet they cracked the air like glass. I wanted to answer, to make sense of it, but no coherent words came. Instead, I took a breath and tried to meet her gaze, unsure what I'd find there. She turned slowly toward me, hands gripping the edge of the counter, knuckles white. The tension in her shoulders, the slight quiver of her lips, the way her eyes darted away. Every detail made my chest ache. I noticed things I shouldn't. The faint lines near her eyes, the way her hair fell across her forehead when she let it. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, but even my own hesitation felt dangerous. "Do you even know?" she asked, almost whispering now. Her voice broke slightly, but there was no anger, just confusion, frustration, the raw weight of needing clarity. I don't," I admitted, my voice small, careful. I hated how small it sounded. "I can't. I don't know what this is either." She nodded, slowly, a shadow of relief passing over her features, as if hearing me admit the same confusion allowed her a tiny bit of space. We stood there, the storm outside making the world feel suspended, our silence stretching and pressing in all at once. For the first time, it felt like the rules we had been pretending to follow, professional, polite, casual, didn't exist anymore. Every glance, every pause, every minor touch had been loaded, and neither of us could ignore it. She shifted, almost imperceptibly, closer, and I noticed how fragile her posture seemed. I wanted to say something, anything, but I held back. Words weren't enough. Nothing I could say would explain the tension, the confusion, the pull between us. Finally, she let out a long, shaky breath and said, quieter than I'd ever heard, "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't pretend this is normal anymore." The sentence hung in the air, heavier than the storm, and I realized I couldn't breathe properly. I wanted to reply, to promise her I understood, to make it better. But there was nothing to say, only the unbearable weight of what she had admitted, of the unspoken truth we were both circling but refusing to name. And then she looked at me, eyes glossy, lips parted, and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe I've already hurt you." It started with a stack of letters I was organizing, old, yellowed envelopes with her sister's handwriting on them. I was careful, methodical, when one slipped from the pile and landed face up. I froze when I realized it wasn't addressed to me. She had been standing nearby, browsing the poetry section, and I hadn't noticed her watching me until she cleared her throat. "Those aren't yours," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. I looked up, startled, and she was holding something in her hands, a faded photograph, edges curled, of a younger version of herself, smiling with a man whose face I didn't know. "I found him once," she said, her eyes dropping to the floor, "and then he was gone." She didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of her confession settle between us. The storm outside had stopped, but the quiet in the bookstore felt endless, heavy, pressing. I swallowed, unsure what to say. My hands itched to reach out, but I knew some things couldn't be fixed with touch. I didn't know," I said, my voice almost too small. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself as if bracing for judgment or disappointment. She shook her head, a sad, almost ironic smile tugging at her lips. "It's not about knowing. It's about remembering. About carrying it, even when you think it's tucked away." Her fingers traced the edge of the photograph, lingering on the man's face, her lips barely moving. I wanted to ask who he was, what happened, but the words felt intrusive. Instead, I simply said, "I get it. Kind of. More than you think." And I did. The grief in her posture, the hesitation in her laughter, the way she looked at the photograph as if it could tell her what she needed. It mirrored something I'd seen before, in someone I'd lost too. For a long moment, we didn't speak. She handed me the photo slowly, almost reluctantly, and I took it, feeling the thin weight of her story in my hands. The room seemed smaller, warmer, quieter. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the subtle hitch in her breath, the small flinch when she realized I had touched the photograph. Then she looked at me, and for a moment, her defenses slipped. "It's stupid," she whispered, voice fragile. "I shouldn't care anymore, but I can't help it." The words weren't dramatic, weren't shouted. They were almost casual, but they landed in my chest like something heavy and precise. I nodded, trying to anchor the moment without saying too much. There was no need for grand gestures, no need to fix anything. Just being here, in the quiet, holding a fragment of her past, was enough. She exhaled slowly, eyes still fixed on the floor, and then glanced up at me with something that startled me. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark of trust. "Thanks," she murmured. And as she stepped back, the air between us shifted just a little. Not everything was different, not yet, but something had moved, quietly, irrevocably, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The bookstore smelled of old paper and rain-soaked wood when she returned that evening. I was stacking the last few unshelved books, the fading light casting long shadows across the floor. She didn't speak at first, just leaned against the counter, shoulders slumped, a faint tired smile tugging at her lips. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to break the fragile quiet. "Hey," she replied, her voice low, careful. The way she looked at me now, it wasn't teasing, it wasn't playful, it was measured, almost hesitant. But it carried weight, a subtle acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us, all the pauses, the almosts, the unspoken confessions. We moved slowly, almost unconsciously, toward the back corner of the store. There was space for both of us to exist without crowding the other, but not so much that the distance felt cold. We didn't need words. The silence carried everything that mattered. I noticed her fingers brush against mine as she reached for a stack of novels. Neither of us pulled away. It was the smallest, most ordinary contact, yet it carried the force of all the things we hadn't said. My chest tightened, not with panic or desire exactly, but with recognition that we were here, fully, honestly, with each other in a way that couldn't be undone. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. I'm glad you stayed," she murmured. Not glad in a casual sense, not polite. Glad in a way that acknowledged months of unspoken tension, all the moments we'd circled each other, too cautious to act, too honest to lie. "I'm glad you came back," I replied quietly. The words felt absurd in their simplicity, but they carried everything we needed. Relief, recognition, and the faint, fragile thrill of inevitability. We stood there, side by side, the storm outside long gone. And for a moment it didn't matter that we weren't supposed to feel this, that life was messy, that she had a past, and I had too much uncertainty to ever feel fully secure. All of that melted into the stillness. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned her forehead against my shoulder. I froze for a heartbeat, then relaxed, letting the weight settle naturally, as if it had been waiting to happen. My hand found hers, our fingers interlacing without thought, without demand, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had already been understood between us. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence was enough. The quiet connection, the unremarkable intimacy of shared space, of presence, of trust, said more than any grand confession ever could. When she finally pulled back, even slightly, it was with a small, tired smile that carried no apologies, no hesitation. And I realized, whatever this was, whatever we had finally allowed ourselves to feel, it was enough. Enough that the moment didn't need fireworks or declarations. Enough that, for the first time in months, I could just breathe and know she was here, and that she would stay, if only in this quiet, real way. And in that silence, everything settled into place. Looking back now, it's strange how the smallest moments can change everything. The way she smiled at me that first day, the quiet pause before she spoke, the brush of her fingers against mine. Those little things didn't just pass. They lingered, shaped me in ways I didn't understand at the time. I've learned that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or dramatic confessions. Sometimes, it seeps in quietly, in shared silences, in the patience of two people learning how to exist together without forcing anything. She taught me that. Her strength, her restraint, the way she carried both her past and her vulnerabilities. It forced me to slow down, to observe, to care in ways I hadn't thought possible. And I think it changed her too. I saw her let go of the weight she'd been holding for years, the unspoken regrets, the cautious boundaries, and trust someone with the space she had always guarded. Not in a leap, not in a declaration, but in small, measured ways. A glance, a touch, a quiet conversation at closing time. We didn't suddenly become perfect or free of the past, but we became present. That presence, that mutual willingness to just be with each other, is what made it real. It's not romantic in the way people imagine in movies, but it's better than any script. Honest, flawed, and ours. Sometimes I catch myself remembering the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, or the subtle tremor in her hands when she finally let her guard down. And I realize that those fragments of her, the ones I almost didn't notice, are the ones that changed me the most. They taught me patience, respect, and the beauty of noticing someone fully without demanding anything in return. We sit together now, in quiet, familiar spaces, no words needed. There's comfort in the ordinary, in shared routines, in knowing that even without grand gestures, the connection is undeniable. I've learned that love doesn't always announce itself. It can just exist, quietly and persistently, reshaping your world one small moment at a time. If there's a takeaway, it's that sometimes what matters most isn't the grand confession or the dramatic climax. It's the patience, the trust, the slow unfolding of understanding, and the courage to stay present for someone even when the outcome is uncertain. That's how real connection survives, and that's what we discovered together. And I still think about that first smile, the one that started it all, the one that made me consider what it would mean to pretend she wasn't her sister for just a moment. Some things never leave you, and maybe they shouldn't. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?